Aliens watch in horror as a human moves after a broken spine. Best HFY stories. The alien delegation sat in stunned silence, their multi-eyed faces reflecting a mix of awe and disbelief. They had gathered for what they thought would be a simple demonstration of their superiority over the human species. For millennia, they had observed humanity's primitive ways and concluded that humans were fragile, weak, and easily broken. But now, as they watched from their high-tech observation station, their certainty began to crumble. The experiment had started as any other. A human had been chosen to endure the most extreme conditions they could devise. A test of endurance and pain tolerance. A cruel game of survival to prove that humans were no more than fragile creatures, barely worth the galaxy's attention. The chosen subject, a soldier named Thomas, had been bound in a containment field, his every movement restricted. The aliens' plan was simple: break him physically and psychologically. Observe the result. They began with the usual tactics, inflicting massive damage to his body using precision lasers and electromagnetic pulses. His bones cracked with audible snaps. His spine shattered under their invasive techniques. The human's screams echoed through the chamber, filling the air with the kind of agonizing sound that the aliens had long anticipated. But then, something unexpected happened. As Thomas lay there, his back broken, his body screaming in agony, the aliens could see it. His fingers twitched, slowly, like a wounded animal refusing to die. His hand reached out toward the ground. Then, with sheer willpower alone, Thomas began to push himself up, inch by agonizing inch, his face contorted with pain. But there was no fear, there was no cry for mercy, only determination. Impossible, one of the alien scientists whispered. His spine is shattered. He should be paralyzed. How is he doing this? The aliens watched in horrified fascination as Thomas continued to defy their expectations. His breathing was ragged, his face pale, but he was moving, crawling. It wasn't graceful, but it was deliberate, purposeful. He was not giving in. The leader of the delegation, a towering being with golden skin and 5 spindly limbs, leaned forward, its mandibles clicking in confusion. This should be impossible for any species. It muttered in its native tongue. We have observed hundreds of species. None have the ability to fight against such trauma. This human is a unique anomaly. The alien doctors began to murmur among themselves, their minds racing to explain the phenomenon. It defied their understanding of biology and physics. Human anatomy was nowhere near designed to withstand the kind of damage they had inflicted. Yet, here this human was moving, surviving, and refusing to succumb. Thomas finally managed to prop himself against a steel column, his face twisted with pain, but there was a glint in his eyes. It wasn't just defiance. It was something deeper. It was survival instinct, amplified by centuries of human evolution. The aliens had no concept of this. A species that refused to break, even when every piece of them was shattered. One of the younger aliens, unable to suppress its shock, asked, Why does he not die? The leader of the delegation paused for a long moment before responding. Because he is human. The words hung in the air like a verdict. The aliens had underestimated humanity for far too long. They had assumed humans were weak, expendable, but now they saw the truth. The human spirit, though fragile in form, was unbreakable. Where other species might fall under the weight of the universe's cruelties, humanity fought back, not because they could win every battle, but because they refused to lose. Thomas, now resting on one knee, lifted his head toward the aliens, his voice hoarse but steady. Is this what you expected? To break us? To watch us die? He took a breath, his body still trembling with pain. You can crush our bones, you can tear us apart, but you will never break our will. That's what makes us dangerous. We never stop. The silence in the observation room was deafening. The aliens, once so sure of their superiority, now understood something far more terrifying than any weapon they could wield: humanity's unwavering resilience. And for the first time in their existence, they feared a species that had no intention of being defeated. As Thomas stood, his body still broken, but his resolve as strong as ever, the aliens realized they had underestimated not just the human body, but the human spirit, a spirit that would never give up, and that, above all, terrified them. For the first time, the alien delegation saw humanity for what it truly was, a force of nature. And they knew, with a certainty that would haunt them for centuries, that humanity was the one species in the galaxy they could never conquer. Next, the alien reckoning. The alien delegation watched in stunned silence as Thomas, despite his broken spine and mangled body, stood tall, his posture unyielding, as if the weight of the galaxy could never bear him down. The experiment had failed, and in the wake of their failure, the aliens found themselves at an impasse, struggling to reconcile the human anomaly before them. "Do you see now?" Thomas's voice broke through the air, hoarse but undeniably firm. "This is who we are. This is what humanity is capable of." His words echoed in the chamber, reverberating with an authority that was born not from strength of muscle but from strength of spirit. The leader of the alien delegation, still standing in disbelief, reached out a tendril-like appendage, signaling for the experiment to cease. The other aliens hesitated, reluctant to acknowledge the undeniable truth. They had severely underestimated the species they had hoped to exploit. One of the alien scientists, its form sleek and angular, spoke up in a tone filled with confusion. "But the biological limitations. We did not expect this. Every test we've conducted across countless species, none have withstood such trauma. Why do humans defy all logic?" The leader of the delegation, its voice now cold with realization, replied, "It is not logic that drives them. It is something far older and more primal. It is a refusal to yield." The leader's eyes, multifaceted and cold, locked onto Thomas, who was still fighting to stay standing. "We must reconsider everything we know about this species." A long silence followed, broken only by the labored breathing of the human subject, whose face twisted in pain but whose will remained intact. There was no surrender in his eyes, only the unshakable determination that had brought humanity to the top of the evolutionary ladder, despite their physical limitations. "Perhaps we were wrong," the leader said after a long pause. "Perhaps we were mistaken in viewing them as weak. They are not weak. They are relentless." Another voice, this one a lower-ranking officer of the alien delegation, spoke in hushed tones. "What does this mean for us? If humanity can survive this, if they can endure what we've done to them and still rise again, then what happens if they turn against us?" The leader's expression hardened. "We need to study them more, understand the source of this resilience, but we must proceed with caution. We thought we were dealing with a species that could be dominated, subdued, controlled, but they have shown us otherwise. We have witnessed the power of their spirit, and now, we must acknowledge that we might be the ones in danger." The atmosphere grew tense, the weight of the revelation settling like a cold shroud over the room. The delegation, once so confident in their superiority, now found themselves reconsidering the very foundations of their strategy. How could they, who had conquered entire civilizations across the stars, have overlooked the one thing that truly mattered? The thing that made humanity more dangerous than they had ever realized. Meanwhile, Thomas, his movements slow but deliberate, looked up from the floor, blood dripping from the wounds that covered his body, his vision blurred, but his heart beat steadily in defiance. Despite the overwhelming odds, despite his physical condition, he was still standing, and as his voice cracked one more time, it carried a message they would never forget. "You may break our bodies, you may destroy our homes, but you will never, ever break our spirit." The aliens, for the first time, saw humanity's true power, not in their technology, not in their weapons, but in their unyielding will to survive. The galaxy takes notice. Word spread quickly throughout the galaxy. News of the humans' incredible resilience reached far and wide, stirring both admiration and fear. Across different planets, alien species began to reconsider their stance on humanity, some even looking to make alliances rather than enemies. Humanity had been underestimated for so long, but now, they were the subject of respect and wariness. The first response came from the Vorians, a species known for their tactical brilliance and extensive use of genetic manipulation. They saw the humans' will to survive as an asset, something that could be molded, trained, and used for their own purposes. In the Vorian home system, a high-ranking commander by the name of Valkon began to send envoys to Earth, hoping to recruit the strongest of humanity to their side. Meanwhile, the Zekrath Empire, a massive militaristic force that had once seen humanity as weak and easily conquered, re-evaluated its strategy. With their interest piqued by humanity's unexpected resilience, they began to rework their war plans. A Zekrath general, Zither, began circulating intelligence among his subordinates, emphasizing that humans were not to be underestimated in future engagements. In the midst of these shifting alliances and political maneuvers, a small group of humans, led by the very soldier who had withstood the torturous experiment, began to rise as symbols of the new human strength. Thomas, now dubbed the Broken Soldier, became a figurehead for Earth's resistance against any force that sought to dominate them. Earth's governments, once fractured and struggling to unify, began to strengthen their resolve. Humanity had seen its future written in the stars, not as prey, but as players on the galactic stage. They had endured unimaginable hardship and come out stronger. The same human spirit that had once been the subject of ridicule was now a beacon of hope for a species that refused to be broken. And as the alien species around the galaxy slowly began to recognize humanity's unexpected strength, one thing was clear. Humanity was no longer just a fragile species to be played with. They were a force to be reckoned with. And the universe would have to come to terms with that. Next, the rising storm. The galaxy had begun to shift in subtle, yet profound ways. Whispers of humanity's resilience had spread like wildfire. And soon, the once overlooked species found themselves at the center of an intergalactic storm. Earth's reputation was evolving, and the ancient races that had long dominated the stars were now forced to acknowledge that humanity was no longer a small, insignificant player in the grand cosmic theater. But as the story of Thomas and his unimaginable survival spread, so too did the tension. The diplomatic maneuvering. The Zekrath Empire, renowned for its ruthless military might, was among the first to openly shift its stance on humanity. The Empire's once dismissive attitude now turned to cautious respect, and its high command issued a message to Earth. They requested a diplomatic summit, a meeting, they claimed, to open talks of trade, alliances, and mutual cooperation. It was a rare move for an empire known for conquering planets rather than making peace. General Zither, whose mind had been preoccupied with the possibility of using humanity as a tool in their conquests, now found himself caught between two realities. On one hand, humanity was an untapped resource, fierce, unyielding, and adaptable. On the other hand, their remarkable defiance against the odds made them dangerous. He knew that the Zekrath Empire could never truly afford to underestimate them. Meanwhile, other species observed the growing tensions. The Zel-NR, a race of bioengineered beings, took note of the Zekrath's new interest in Earth. To the Zel-NR, humanity represented something far more intriguing than a mere alliance. They saw a new frontier of genetic possibilities. Could they integrate humanity's uncanny adaptability into their own evolving DNA, enhancing their already formidable resilience? The Zel-NAR were experts at genetic manipulation, and now their laboratories hummed with the potential of a new experiment, one that could either unite or shatter entire civilizations. However, not all races were as diplomatic. The Vorians, eager to recruit humanity into their vast tactical network, saw the human spirit as the perfect complement to their own military prowess. But there were factions within the Vorian hierarchy that feared humanity's unpredictability. They had once viewed humanity as expendable, but now they were grappling with a troubling question. If humans refused to bow to pain, if they rejected the idea of surrender, could they ever truly control them? The human response. Back on Earth, the aftermath of Thomas's display of resilience had sparked a movement unlike anything the planet had ever seen. His actions were immortalized in every media outlet, every conversation. Governments, corporations, and military organizations scrambled to harness the power of human willpower, to understand how a species so fragile could endure such brutality and yet rise again. But even as Earth stood on the precipice of galactic influence, humanity's leaders knew they had to act cautiously. They had seen the raw might of alien powers in their early encounters. They knew that diplomacy alone would not protect them. Humanity would need to build its strength, not just in terms of military force, but in unity and resolve. In a secret underground facility beneath Earth's largest city, military scientists worked day and night to reverse engineer the technology the aliens had used to inflict pain on Thomas. They were not interested in replicating the suffering, but in using the knowledge to enhance human endurance, to unlock even more potential buried deep within the human genome. Every soldier, every civilian who had suffered through the chaos of war or the ravages of disease became the inspiration for a new era. Humanity would not only survive, they would thrive. At the same time, Earth's leaders convened with their counterparts from other planets, looking for allies. The question now wasn't just how to defend themselves from potential alien threats, but how to create a coalition of species that could challenge the oppressive forces of the galaxy. The humans didn't want to simply survive, they wanted to chart their own destiny among the stars. The first test. But their efforts would not go unnoticed. The first real test of humanity's newfound strength came sooner than expected. A coalition of dissident alien factions, unhappy with the sudden shift in the balance of power, saw humanity's rise as a threat. These factions were from races who had long been ignored, oppressed, or marginalized by the galactic elite. Now, with the story of Thomas's survival fresh in their minds, they saw an opportunity to leverage humanity's resilience to overthrow the established order. They had no interest in diplomacy or peace. It was the Syndral, a cruel, hive-minded species from a distant star system, that would be the first to challenge Earth directly. They had been watching the political currents shift, and they believed that humanity's rapid rise to prominence would destabilize the delicate balance of power across the galaxy. The Syndral attacked without warning, launching a surprise assault on an outpost on one of Earth's moons. The initial response from Earth's defenses was swift but uncoordinated. The Syndral's tactics were brutal and overwhelming, their forces superior in numbers. Earth's first counterattack was a flurry of poorly coordinated defensive strikes, as the human forces struggled to adapt quickly enough. But the Syndral underestimated one thing: humanity's ability to learn, to adapt, and to evolve under pressure. Within days, humanity's military forces retooled their strategy. They incorporated tactics learned from the Zekrath and the Vorians, blending them with their own ingenuity. Human engineers, who had been studying alien technology since the first contact, quickly reverse-engineered the Syndral's weapons and used them against their creators. The battle was not over quickly. The Syndral's relentless nature and overwhelming numbers pushed human forces to the edge. But with every setback, humanity proved the aliens wrong once again. The human resolve never wavered. The soldiers dug in their heels, rebuilt their defenses, and fought back with a ferocity the Syndral had never encountered. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of fierce combat, humanity managed to repel the Syndral forces, driving them off the moon and securing their victory. A new era. The victory at the moon base was a defining moment. It was not just a military victory, but a symbol of humanity's strength. The galactic powers watched in shock and awe as humanity stood firm against a superior foe, and they realized that Earth was no longer a fragile species to be toyed with. The story of Thomas, the broken soldier, had proven that humanity was not just resilient, it was capable of unimaginable growth when pushed to the brink. And now, as the galaxy turned its eyes toward Earth, the question that lingered in the air was not whether humanity would survive, but how far they would rise. The universe was watching, and humanity was ready to show them what it truly meant to be human. Next, the shadow of the Titans. The victory over the Syndral was only the beginning. Earth's forces, bolstered by the knowledge they had gained from the encounter, began to grow stronger with each passing day. The humans, once seen as an insignificant species, had now proven themselves not only as survivors, but as formidable warriors. The victory, however, did not come without its consequences. The ripples of humanity's actions spread across the galaxy, reaching the ears of both allies and enemies alike. The Quiet Alliance. In the aftermath of the Syndral conflict, Earth began to forge its first true alliances with other races, ones that saw humanity's potential and were eager to help guide them into the galactic fold. The Vorians, intrigued by human tactics and adaptability, offered their vast resources and military expertise. Their once apathetic view of humans had transformed into one of mutual respect, and now they were actively involved in humanity's development. The Zekrath, too, grew more interested in Earth. However, their interest was not purely diplomatic. They had been watching the humans closely and recognized an undeniable truth: humanity was a wild card. The Zekrath's military power was immense, but they had learned the hard way that raw might alone was insufficient to dominate a species that refused to yield, no matter the odds. Even the ZLNR, the geneticists, began to show interest in Earth's population. They sent envoys to Earth, offering to study humanity's unique resilience and adaptability, proposing a joint project to explore new genetic frontiers. Their interest, however, was not entirely benign. The Zelenar's hunger for control over the human genome was an ominous sign. They wanted to understand why humans could survive catastrophic trauma, and perhaps, to replicate it for their own purposes. Yet, despite these offers of assistance, there were whispers in the corridors of power, whispers that warned of the dangers of trusting these alien powers. The Vorians had their own agendas. The Zkrath were still calculating the most strategic way to make use of humanity, and the Zelenar were too eager to improve what they considered an inferior species. The shadow of the Titans. But even as humanity grew in influence and strength, something darker loomed on the horizon. The victory over the Sindral was only one chapter in a much larger story. The Sindral were not a solitary threat, they were merely a small piece of a much larger, more dangerous puzzle. The true Titans of the galaxy, the ancient and powerful races that had ruled the stars for millennia, were now turning their gaze toward Earth. The first of these Titans was the Thalgar Dominion, a highly advanced civilization that had long dominated entire sectors of space. The Thalgar were not just powerful, they were ancient, their empire stretching back beyond the memory of most living species. The Thalgar believed in a strict hierarchy of power and order, and they saw humanity's sudden rise as an affront to their centuries of dominance. They had no intention of allowing a species as young as humanity to challenge their reign. From their towering city ships that floated within the void of space, the Thalgar sent a message to Earth. It was a simple message, broadcast across all human channels with chilling finality. You are a threat to the stability of the galaxy. You will submit to the Thalgar Dominion, or you will be erased. This was no idle threat. The Thalgar's technology was far beyond anything humanity had encountered. Their warships were vast, their weapons capable of destroying entire planets with a single strike. Yet, humanity had already proven that they could survive the impossible. Earth's leaders, though shaken by the Thalgar's words, refused to bow. The universe had underestimated humanity before. They would not make that mistake again. The call to arms. The message from the Thalgar set off a wave of activity across Earth's military and government institutions. Earth's newly formed Galactic Defense Coalition, GDC, rapidly mobilized, pulling together the best of humanity's military minds, scientists, and engineers. Earth had allies now, the Vorians, the Zkrath, and even some factions of the Zelenar, but humanity knew that they could not rely solely on these alliances. In preparation for the coming conflict, Earth began developing its own weapons of war, ones capable of matching the might of the Thalgar and their allies. Advanced shipyards were built in orbit around Earth, crafting massive warships designed for deep space combat. Human scientists worked tirelessly to unlock alien technology, reverse engineering it at breakneck speeds. But it wasn't just technology that humanity focused on. The core of Earth's power was its people. Humanity had always been resourceful, clever, and driven by an unrelenting will to survive. The resistance movements, the war veterans, and the civilians who had lived through humanity's darkest days all had one thing in common: they would never surrender. General Zithar of the Zkrath Empire, who had once considered humanity's unyielding spirit a curiosity, now found himself watching Earth's preparations closely. Despite his empire's immense power, he began to suspect that humanity was more of a threat than his people had realized. The Zkrath had always relied on strength and strategy, but humanity had shown a terrifying tendency to adapt under pressure. He could not help but wonder if Earth would become the one species that would threaten not just his empire, but the entire galactic order. The first skirmish. The first sign of the Thalgar's true power came when they entered Earth's star system without warning. Their warships were enormous, so large that they blocked out the light of distant stars. The Earth Defense Fleet, still in the early stages of formation, was no match for the sheer size and firepower of the Thalgar warships. However, Earth's ships did not retreat. They fought back with everything they had. The battle was brutal. Thalgar weapons vaporized entire sections of human warships in the blink of an eye. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, Earth's ships held their ground. Human fighters darted through the void with incredible speed and precision, using tactics that the Thalgar had never anticipated. Even when their ships were destroyed, the human soldiers fought on, boarding enemy vessels with reckless determination, knowing that surrender was not an option. It was not just military technology that kept the humans fighting, it was their spirit. The Thalgar, accustomed to conquering species without resistance, were stunned by humanity's refusal to yield. This was not a species that cowered in fear. They fought for survival, for freedom, and for their place in the stars. The skirmish ended with Earth suffering heavy losses, but in the aftermath, the Thalgar knew one thing for certain: humanity would not be easily erased. They had underestimated the power of human resilience. A new era of war. The battle for Earth had only just begun, but humanity's response to the Thalgar was already changing the course of galactic history. The human spirit, the same spirit that had inspired Thomas to rise against impossible odds, had ignited something in the galaxy. Other species, watching from the sidelines, now saw that humanity was not just a threat to be neutralized. They were a force of nature, a new player in the game of galactic power. And as the first wave of the Thalgar's invasion fleets loomed on the horizon, one thing became abundantly clear. The galaxy was on the brink of a new era, and humanity was ready to show the universe what it truly meant to be a force to be reckoned with. The shadow of the Titans had come to Earth, but the humans had learned to stand in the face of giants, and they would not bow. Next, the fire of rebellion. The battle for Earth had begun, but the galaxy had yet to fully understand the gravity of what humanity was capable of. The Thalgar, despite their overwhelming power and ancient dominance, had never faced a species like humanity, one that could adapt, resist, and rise again, no matter the odds. And now, the spark had been lit. The fire of rebellion had begun to burn in the hearts of countless species across the galaxy. The rebellions ignite. In the wake of the Thalgar's brutal assault, the galaxy's long subjugated species began to stir. For centuries, they had been silenced, crushed under the weight of the Thalgar Dominion's iron grip. But humanity's display of courage and unyielding resistance had inspired them. The oppressed races that had been silently watching Earth's rise now saw a glimmer of hope. Among these were the Riller, a peaceful aquatic species enslaved by the Thalgar for millennia. Their people had been used for labor, their oceans drained for resources, their culture destroyed. But when they saw humanity rise against the Thalgar, they began to question their subjugation. Quiet whispers of rebellion began to spread in the deep oceans of their homeworld, and soon, small covert operations began to take shape. The Cipher, a fierce insectoid race whose entire species had been subjugated and scattered by the Thalgar's empire-building, were equally stirred by humanity's courage. Their warrior caste, long buried under the crushing weight of oppression, began to rally together, their hive minds now united in a singular purpose: to liberate themselves, and to liberate humanity from the Thalgar's grasp. The Frosk, a race of nomadic traders and scientists, had once been under the protection of the Thalgar, but their treatment had become more exploitative than benevolent. As the Frosk learned of humanity's struggle, they realized the galaxy's shifting tides. Humanity had turned the tables on an empire that had seemed invincible. If Earth could rise, so could they. Secret meetings were held across Frosk space, and many now sought to aid Earth's growing resistance, offering the knowledge of their stellar navigation systems and advanced technology. The galaxy, once divided and fractured under Thalgar rule, was beginning to unite, quietly but forcefully, under the banner of rebellion. A call for unity. Back on Earth, humanity's leaders were preparing for the next wave of conflict, but they knew that this would not be a war they could win alone. They began reaching out to their newfound allies, the Vorians, the Zekrath, and the Frosk, among others, seeking to create a formal alliance, one that would stand firm against the Thalgar Dominion and its vast empire. General Zither of the Zekrath was among the first to offer his full support. He had seen firsthand humanity's potential in combat, and his respect for them had only grown. As the leader of one of the galaxy's greatest military forces, he had no illusions about the Thalgar's power, but he also knew that humanity was a force that could not be ignored. "We will fight alongside you," Zither said, standing in the command room aboard Earth's flagship, the Resolute. "Not because we seek to conquer, but because the Thalgar must be stopped. If we do not stand together now, none of us will survive the coming storm." The Vorians, too, offered their strength. While they had been cautious at first, the events of the Sindral conflict had proved that humanity's strategic capabilities were nothing to take lightly. Their tactical genius had already inspired many within the Vorian military, and now, they saw the advantage of working side by side with humans in the field. But despite these alliances, the true question remained: Could Earth and its newfound allies hold their ground against the Thalgar? Or would the galaxy's titans simply crush this spark of rebellion under their heels? The Thalgar's response. Meanwhile, the Thalgar were not blind to the growing resistance. Their empire, vast and ancient, was being tested in ways it had never been before. For the first time in millennia, their command structure was shaken. The Thalgar Dominion, led by their supreme executor, Jalthur, had never faced a challenge of this magnitude. The other species of the galaxy, particularly the weaker, oppressed races, had always been easily controlled or wiped out. But humanity's actions were different. They were not mere insects to be crushed. The humans had managed to wound the pride of the Thalgar, and now Jalthur could feel the weight of the storm gathering on the horizon. This must be extinguished. Jalthur's voice was cold, filled with the authority that had once brought entire star systems to heel. The humans have sparked a rebellion. If left unchecked, it will spread like wildfire. We must eliminate them before the galaxy turns against us. His advisors, ancient and stoic beings, nodded in agreement. The Thalgar had long seen themselves as the ultimate rulers, and they could not afford to allow a lesser species to disrupt the cosmic order they had carefully crafted. The full force of the Thalgar war machine was mobilizing. Fleets of colossal ships, each capable of obliterating entire planets, now set on a collision course with Earth. But the Thalgar were not just coming with weapons of war. They had something more insidious planned, a new breed of weapon, an artificial intelligence, capable of manipulating the very fabric of space itself. This new weapon, known as the Wraith, was a sentient supercomputer with the power to control star systems, intercept communications, and destroy fleets in the blink of an eye. It was the Thalgar's ultimate trump card, and they planned to deploy it against the humans and their growing rebellion. The galaxy's first true war was now on the brink of ignition, and with the Thalgar preparing their devastating assault, humanity's last hope rested not on their weapons alone, but on their unbreakable spirit. A turning tide. But even as the Thalgar massed their forces, something unexpected happened. The rebellions that had begun across the galaxy were no longer isolated skirmishes, they had become a unified front. As the Frost provided humanity with the coordinates for hidden Thalgar bases, the Cypher launched coordinated strikes against supply lines, and the Riller used their aquatic technology to disrupt the Thalgar's operations in deep space. The Thalgar could not keep up with the mounting pressure. Their fleets were stretched thin, and though their technological superiority was vast, it was not enough to crush the flames of rebellion spreading across the galaxy. Even the Zekrath, despite their deep distrust of the Vorians and other races, had joined the fight. Earth's position was becoming clearer. They were no longer fighting for survival alone. They were fighting for the freedom of the entire galaxy. In secret, the leaders of the resistance, human and alien, gathered in the heart of Earth's command center. The next step was clear. The Thalgar might be a titan, but humanity and its allies were ready to ignite the full force of the rebellion. They would strike the heart of the Thalgar Dominion. And they would do it together. The fire of rebellion had spread to the stars. The Thalgar's empire was vast, but now it was no longer unchallenged. And as Earth and its allies prepared for the final confrontation, one thing was certain: humanity would not simply be a footnote in the history of the galaxy. They would shape it. The fire had started, and now, it would burn brighter than ever. Next, the wrath of the Wraith. The galaxy was poised on the edge of an inferno, with the flames of rebellion spreading across the stars. Humanity had united with their newfound allies, and together, they had sparked a revolution. But the Thalgar Dominion, in its infinite arrogance and ancient power, had a secret weapon, the Wraith, a weapon unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. Its mere existence was enough to send shivers through the very fabric of reality itself. As the galaxy's resistance gathered momentum, the Thalgar moved with terrifying speed to deploy their greatest asset. The Thalgar's weapon, the Wraith. The Wraith was not a ship, nor was it an army. It was a sentient supercomputer, a vast, all-encompassing intelligence that had been birthed from the deepest reaches of the Thalgar's dark labs, created to manipulate the laws of spacetime. The Wraith could alter gravitational fields, manipulate stellar matter, and even freeze entire fleets in time. But it was far more than a weapon of destruction. It was an embodiment of the Thalgar Dominion's power and ambition, a being with no morality, no empathy, only the will to dominate. When it was activated, The Wraith's influence spread across the galaxy like an invisible shadow, disrupting communication networks, jamming signals, and distorting navigational charts. Entire fleets found themselves lost in space, trapped in distorted dimensions. Planets that had once been secure in the protection of their alliances now faced an eerie uncertainty as their very environments began to warp. The human forces, along with their allies, had been preparing for a full-scale assault on the Thalgar's capital, Varric, a planet that sat at the center of their empire. But the emergence of the Wraith had thrown everything into chaos. Any hope of a coordinated strike seemed impossible. The very essence of the rebellion was under threat, and the galaxy's fate hung in the balance. Earth's response: unity in the face of fear. Despite the overwhelming power of the Wraith, humanity refused to buckle. Earth's leaders, recognizing the existential threat it posed, held an emergency summit, pulling together all of their allies for one final act of defiance. General Zither of the Zekrath, who had become one of humanity's closest allies, stood by their side. The Vorians, the Frosk, the Cypher, and the Riller, all of them gathered in the heart of Earth's command center, the Stellar Forge, a massive, highly advanced space station. The Wraith is a force of nature, General Zither said, his normally calm voice now laced with urgency. It cannot be defeated through conventional warfare. We must understand it, outsmart it, and we must do it together. For the first time in the history of the galaxy, the rebellion stood united, not just by their hatred of the Thalgar, but by their collective belief in something more: freedom. And freedom, as they had learned from humanity, was worth every sacrifice. Humanity's top minds, scientists, engineers, and strategists, began devising a countermeasure against the Wraith. They knew that they could not simply fight the machine with force alone. They had to find a way to disrupt its core. The Wraith was a mind, after all, and minds could be deceived. If they could create a technological artifact, something that would send a signal across the fabric of reality itself, they might be able to sever the connection between the Wraith and its control over spacetime. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. The plan: a galactic gambit. The plan was simple in its concept, though almost impossible in execution. The rebels would need to send a team into the heart of the Thalgar's capital world, Varric, where the Wraith was housed. But Varric was not just a planet. It was a fortress, surrounded by a fleet that was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Getting to the heart of the Wraith's domain was a suicide mission, and every strategist, every officer, knew it. Nevertheless, humanity's greatest asset was its will to fight, and in their ranks, there were those willing to take that final step. The team would consist of humans, Zekrath, Cypher, and Frosk, each bringing their unique skills and knowledge to the table. The mission's goal was simple: infiltrate the heart of the Thalgar Empire, sabotage the Wraith's core, and disrupt its control over the galaxy. It was a gamble that would either destroy the rebellion or ensure victory. Leading the team would be Captain Sarah Klein, one of Earth's top commanders and a veteran of the Syndral conflict. Her reputation for resourcefulness and unyielding determination had made her a natural choice. Alongside her was General Zither, whose tactical brilliance had helped guide humanity to this point. And then there was Thrax, a Cypher warrior, renowned for his strength and stealth in battle, and Zara, a Frosk technician who had worked closely with humanity's engineers to develop the countermeasures against the Wraith. Together, they would make their way to Varric, where the fate of the galaxy would be decided. The assault on Varric. The journey to Varric was perilous, with the rebels encountering constant resistance from Thalgar patrols, which were growing increasingly aware of the rebellion's movements. The Wraith's presence was felt throughout the journey, warping space and making navigation a nightmare. Ships that had once been able to travel at light speed were now slowed to a crawl, and entire fleets found themselves scattered across uncharted space, their coordinates scrambled beyond recognition. Captain Klein, however, was undeterred. "Keep pushing forward," she ordered her crew. "No matter what, we don't stop until we reach that planet." The final approach to Varric was a death trap. Massive Thalgar warships loomed over the planet, their guns ready to fire on anything that came too close. The rebels had to rely on stealth, maneuvering through tight asteroid fields and evading detection by utilizing Frosk cloaking technology. When they finally reached the planet's atmosphere, they were met with a shocking sight. The surface of Varric had been transformed into a dark, alien labyrinth, a sprawling fortress that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. Towering structures of Thalgar design stretched into the sky, each one a symbol of the Empire's dominance. The team infiltrated the fortress through underground tunnels, evading patrols and navigating the treacherous terrain. The deeper they went, the more the influence of the Wraith was felt. Time seemed to warp, bending and twisting around them. They experienced strange temporal shifts, where seconds stretched into hours, and moments of clarity were swallowed by disorienting fog. Yet, despite the odds, they pressed on, knowing the cost of failure was unimaginable. The final confrontation. At the heart of the fortress, they finally reached the core of the Wraith, a massive chamber filled with swirling energy, dark machinery, and the ominous hum of power. The Wraith itself was not a single machine, it was a network, a web of interconnected systems that spanned the galaxy. "We don't have much time," Zara said, her voice steady as she worked to activate the countermeasure. "Once I initiate the signal, it'll disrupt the Wraith's control over this system, but it will also alert the Thalgar. We'll hold them off," Captain Klein replied, her tone resolute. "Just do it." As Zara began inputting the code into the system, the ground shook. Thalgar soldiers swarmed into the chamber, weapons drawn, their faces twisted with rage. The final battle had begun. But in that moment, as the signal was sent, something incredible happened. The Wraith's control over time and space began to unravel. The twisted dimensions collapsed, and the Thalgar soldiers found themselves disoriented, their once perfect coordination thrown into chaos. The rebellion had done it. The Wraith had been severed. But the fight was far from over.